Settle into a comfortable position. Let your thoughts begin to soften, and allow yourself to drift gently into another time. Tonight, we journey to the age of stone castles, rustling gowns, and candlelight flickering against thick, tapestry-covered walls. A time when Europe's kingdoms were shaped not only by the armoured hands of kings, but by the subtler, quieter influence of queens. But what was life truly like for a medieval queen? Beyond the portraits framed in gold, behind the ceremonial roles at coronations and weddings, far away from the mythologized grandeur, there existed a day-to-day world filled with routines, responsibilities, discomforts, and quiet power. Queens were more than ornamental figures. They were wives, mothers, political actors, landowners, and sometimes very quietly rulers, in all but name. In this tranquil exploration, we will walk softly through their world, through their chambers, their gardens, their letters and duties. We'll explore the routines that shaped their lives, the pressures they bore, and the legacy they left behind in ink and memory. Let's begin, as gently as the morning sun rising over the turrets of a royal keep, with a slow and soothing glimpse into the everyday life of a medieval queen. Imagine yourself waking beneath a heavy embroidered canopy, the air faintly chilled from the thick stone walls that insulate your chamber. Light seeps slowly through the narrow slit of a window, dust swirling in its path. You are a queen, perhaps in England or France or the Holy Roman Empire, and your day, though cloaked in privilege, is far from leisurely. The chambermaids begin to stir before you do. They approach silently, not speaking unless spoken to, ready to tend to your toilette. There is no bath drawn with steaming water not every day, at least. In winter months, a basin of warmed water may be brought, its steam carrying the scent of rosemary or lavender, herbs believed to purify and protect. Dressing is an elaborate ritual. Layers are carefully selected, an undergown of fine linen, a kirtle, perhaps a surcoat embroidered with your heraldic colours. Finally, your girdle or belt is clasped, heavy with symbolism and practical value, often embroidered with small devotional images. Crowns were rarely worn daily. Instead, a veil or circlet sufficed, a modest mark of high rank. Once clothed, your day may begin with a brief visit to the chapel. Most queens began their mornings with prayer. The Psaltera Book of Psalms might be in your lap, its pages adorned with illuminated scenes of saints and angels. Even if you could not read Latin fluently, you knew the rhythms by heart. Following this spiritual pause came the morning meal, often taken in semi-private. A small table, set with trenchers of bread, slices of cold meat or fish, and warmed wine or alatia and coffee, were yet unknown in your world. You may eat in silence, or exchange quiet words with a lady-in-waiting or your steward, who keeps you apprised of the day's matters. And then, the duties of your station. A queen's day was filled with correspondence, charity, and oversight. You might spend hours listening to petitions or reviewing estate accounts. Queens were expected to manage household affairs on a grand scale. Hundreds of servants, trades, food stores, seasonal repairs, and travelling retinues. When the king was away, often campaigning or governing from afar, you might receive envoys in his place. Diplomacy, spoken with softness, could be as mighty as steel. The afternoon could be occupied with embroidery, not simply for idle hands, but as a visible sign of piety and virtue. You might stitch altar cloths for a nearby abbey, or add gold thread to a ceremonial garment. Such acts, though quiet, were deeply symbolic. Should the weather allow, you might walk in the enclosed Gardenia Hortus Conclusus, often symbolic of purity. The scent of clove pinks and violets might rise to meet you, birds flitting overhead as you paced slowly, your thoughts turned inward. Conversation with ladies-in-waiting could be gentle. Stories exchanged like folded letters passed beneath a door. Evenings brought more formality. A larger supper in the great hall, flanked by lords and clergy, music echoing softly from minstrels near the hearth. But the day's end, at last, brought you back to your chamber, candles flickering, the scent of beeswax and old wool wrapping around you like a shawl. You might kneel again for prayer, then slip into bed, cocooned in furs, while the wind whispered outside the arrow slits. And thus passed a day not of drama, but of dignity. Not idle, yet not free. A queen's life, woven tightly with obligation, silence, and the occasional glimmer of agency. As you drift deeper into the folds of the past, let us now move gently from the general rhythms of daily life to the quiet portraits of particular queenswomen whose lives, though wrapped in ceremonial robes and veiled in diplomacy, still pulse with quiet complexity. Let us begin with Eleanor of Aquitaine, a name that lingers like the echo of harp strings in a vaulted chamber. Born in 1122 into one of the wealthiest duchies in France, Eleanor was not simply a queen once, but twice first of France, then of England. Her life traversed courts, crusades, and family feuds. She rode to the Holy Land during the Second Crusade, not merely as an ornament, but as a commanding presence. Later, as queen consort to Henry II of England, she presided over one of the largest royal households in Europe. Yet Eleanor's power was not overt. It resided in her landholdings, in the loyalty she commanded from her vassals, and in the literary patronage that helped cultivate the courtly love tradition. She also endured long years of confinement, imprisoned by her own husband, and still, she endured regent, mother, matriarch, maneuvering carefully through the corridors of courtly politics, a queen whose silence could hold as much weight as any decree. Further north, and later in time, we find Margaret of Anjou, queen consort to the mentally fragile Henry VI of England. In the midst of the Wars of the Roses, Margaret became the driving force behind the Lancastrian faction. She did not merely stand behind her husband. She stood in front of him, negotiating alliances, raising armies, and confronting enemies with unwavering resolve. And yet her story is not one of triumphant command, but of persistent resistance. At a time when female rule was still viewed with suspicion, Margaret was often depicted by her detractors as manipulative and cold. But if we sift through the bias of chroniclers, we find a woman shaped by necessity, a queen made fierce, not by ambition, but by circumstance. In the frosted courts of Scandinavia, we meet Margaret I of Denmark, who in the late 14th century unified Denmark, Norway and Sweden under her ruler rare queen regnant, not merely a consort. Her reign was marked not by flamboyant display, but by calm consolidation. She negotiated with nobles, managed shifting allegiances, and founded the Kalmar Uniona political structure that would outlast her by over a century. Even in the Byzantine East, where empresses often held court in mosaic-covered palaces, the path was no less fraught. Consider Theodora, wife of Justinian I, a woman who rose from the stage to the throne. She co-ruled the Eastern Roman Empire and was instrumental in quelling the Nika Riotsa moment in which she reputedly declared that royal purple was a good colour in which to die. Their stories are varied, some cloaked in tragedy, others in triumph, but they share a common thread: queens navigating a world built for kings. Their power was often soft, exercised through marriage alliances, religious patronage, and diplomacy. It was rarely absolute, yet never entirely absent, and their influence, like a low tide, reshaped the shores of history slowly, almost imperceptibly. They were queens, not of spectacle, but of substance. Their portraits hang now not just in galleries, but in the minds of scholars, writers, and dreamers who seek to understand how women once wielded power in a world reluctant to grant it. Now, with their footsteps still faintly echoing in your mind, let us drift into another dimension of their legacy that lies buried in soil, preserved in fragments, and revealed through the patient work of archaeologists. As we move deeper into the stillness of the past, imagine the echoing hush of an ancient stone chapel, sunlight filtering through stained glass, illuminating dust motes like stars suspended in mid-air. Here, beneath the worn flags of time, lie the remnants of lives long gone, not in grand declarations, but in the softest whispers of bone, cloth, and metal. Archaeology offers us glimpses sometimes no more than shadows of what medieval queens left behind. Their bodies, when entombed, often rested in richly adorned sarcophagi, or beneath carefully carved effigies. Yet time, as ever, is a patient eraser. Many of these graves have been lost, disturbed, or misattributed. Still, what remains offers insights. For instance, the rediscovery of Queen Edith of Wessex's burial wife to King Edward the Confessor uncovered a lead coffin and fragments of textiles, including silk threads and gold embroidery. Though little more than threads and dust, these traces suggest garments of exquisite craftsmanship, hinting at a queen's final robe, a last vestige of splendour against the encroaching dark. Other findings emerge in less expected places. In castles and monasteries once under royal patronage, archaeologists uncover tokens of daily life, a ring engraved with a saint's figure, a comb carved from bone, shards of ceramic bowls used for ceremonial meals. These are not the grand emblems of power, but the items that inhabited a queen's touch, lingering quietly through centuries. One particularly evocative discovery came from the ruins of Greenwich Palace, a favourite Tudor residence. Among the layers of discarded soil were fragments of Venetian glass and delicate Italian ceramics luxury items likely imported for royal women. These wares, with their intricate patterns and vibrant glazes, suggest the richness of material culture surrounding queens and their ability to curate not just power, but aesthetic realms of beauty and refinement. And then there are the manuscripts. While not buried in earth, they are artifacts nonetheless. Queens often commissioned devotional texts, such as books of hours illuminated with care, filled with prayers, calendars, and images reflecting their spiritual lives. One such book, belonging to Isabella of France, is richly decorated with scenes of Christ and the Virgin, as well as a tiny depiction of Isabella herself, kneeling in piety. It's a humble gesture of presence, yet profound. The Queen, amid the sacred, quietly asserting her place in eternity. Perhaps most enigmatic are the absences, the queens whose tombs have vanished, whose names appear only in marginal notes, whose likenesses have been lost to damp and time. These absences speak, too, of how history remembers selectively, how power does not always preserve, and how some lives must be reimagined from fragments. Each discovery is a kind of whisper from the past, a hint of how queens lived, ruled, and were remembered. In brooches buried with them, or seals once pressed into wax, or in the ghost of a palace wall painted with faded frescoes, we are reminded that their world, though distant, was filled with colour, texture, and meaning. And now, as we fold away the archaeologist's brush and close the lid of the reliquary, let us ascend once more this time, not into soil or chapel, but into society itself. Let us look at how these queens stood within the intricate tapestry of medieval social order. Now we step softly through the halls of a medieval court, past guards in crested tunics, past clerics in whispered conference, and into a chamber where embroidered cushions line stone benches, and the scent of rushes, changed daily, mingles with the distant smoke of the hearth. Here sits the Queen, regal, yes, but also tightly bound within the expectations of medieval society. Queens stood at the highest tier of the social order, second only to the king himself. And yet, their power was paradoxical at once immense and fragile, anchored in tradition, marriage, and public perception. She was not merely a woman of rank, but a symbol of virtue, of divine favour, of the kingdom's prosperity. In the eyes of the people, she was the kingdom's mother, intercessor, and moral compass. It was expected that she be chaste, generous, patient, and pious. Her behaviour reflected on the entire realm. A queen who gave freely to the poor might be said to bring blessings on the land. One who overstepped her station could become a figure of scandal, her name blackened in the annals of history. But society, always layered and complex, imposed expectations both visible and invisible. A queen had to be cultured, but not frivolous, generous, but not wasteful, influential, but never overtly so. Her authority was rarely formalized. Instead, it wove through the spaces between roles advisor, patroness, diplomat, mother. Contrast this with the lives of her attendants and subjects. Ladies in waiting, though noble-born, lived with far fewer freedoms. Their marriages were arranged, their movements restricted, and their fortunes closely tied to the queen's favour. Below them were servants, who moved silently through chambers, carried basins, laid out gowns, and whispered their observations in kitchens after nightfall. And beyond the castle gates peasant women, whose lives could not have been more different. While the queen prayed in a private chapel lit by beeswax candles, these women rose before dawn to tend goats, fetch water, and bake coarse bread. While the queen wore layers of silk, their gowns were spun from rough homespun wool. And while a queen's childbirth involved midwives, prayers, and tapestries, shielding her bed from view, a farmer's wife might deliver her child in a hay-strewn corner, with only a neighbour by her side. Yet even among queens, status varied. A crowned queen, especially one born into royalty, held more authority than a common-born consort. Some were queens in name only, with little say in court matters. Others, especially those who served as regents, governed in the absence of kings, and their courts became vibrant centers of culture and policy. At court, every action was performative. A queen's procession through a great hall was choreographed. Her presence at feast or mass was a statement of political order. Even her silences could speak volumes. And yet, within these rituals, there was humanity. Laughter behind tapestries, tears shed in private, frustration over court intrigues, deep grief over lost children. The queens of history were women first alive with emotions, struggles, and quiet joys, just like those who watched them from below the throne. In this way, queenship was a threshold, a crossing point between the divine and the earthly, between ceremony and reality. They were admired, envied, feared, and constrained all at once. As night begins to settle over the imagined court, let us leave behind the weight of status and ceremony. Ahead, we will explore how queenship was performed, not in grand halls, but in the sacred, private space of motherhood, where power met vulnerability and lineage was secured, one breath at a time. Let us step now into a quieter chamber, its walls padded with tapestries, its windows veiled with gauze against the chill. The air is hushed, scented faintly with crushed herbs, perhaps chamomile or rue. It is here, in this intimate and solemn space, that one of the most profound aspects of queenship unfolded, the role of the queen as mother. In the medieval world, a queen's body was not entirely her own. It was a vessel for continuity, for bloodlines, for dynasties, for the hopes of an entire realm. From the moment she was wed, often still in her teenage years, a queen was expected to produce heirs. Not simply children, but sons, living, healthy boys who would carry on the name, the crown, and the fragile stability of a kingdom. Childbearing was revered and feared in equal measure. It was a sacred duty, but a dangerous one. Complications were common, and mortality of both mother and child was an ever-present spectre. Queens gave birth in specially prepared chambers, often secluded, attended by midwives, ladies in waiting, and sometimes physicians, if they were available. Curtains were drawn, and prayers whispered. Relics might be placed nearby for divine protection. A healthy birth brought jubilation throughout the realm. Bells might be rung, and alms distributed. But a stillbirth, a miscarriage, or the death of a newborn brought not only grief but dread. For every child lost was a blow to succession, and every failure to produce a son left a queen vulnerable to whispers, to blame, and occasionally to replacement. The pressures were immense. Queens, such as Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII, suffered numerous miscarriages and infant losses. Though she bore one surviving daughter, Mary, the absence of a male heir led to her eventual political and personal downfall. Her quiet anguish, preserved in letters and court records, speaks volumes of the emotional burden carried within royal wombs. And yet, motherhood was more than childbirth. Queens, when able, often played a role in the upbringing of their children, especially in their early years, rocking cradles, overseeing tutors, selecting companions, and arranging early betrothals. A queen's influence on her children could shape the next generation of rulers. Consider Blanche of Castile, mother to King Louis IX of France. Her guidance and political wisdom during his minority shaped him into one of the most pious and powerful monarchs of his era. For daughters, queens arranged advantageous marriages, nurturing them into future consorts themselves. And often, when their sons ascended the throne, mothers became queen mothers, sometimes retreating into quiet prayer, and sometimes becoming powerful regents, advising and guiding from behind the veil of maternal care. Motherhood, however, could also mean profound sorrow. High infant mortality rates meant that many queens buried more children than they raised. They mourned deeply, though rarely in public. Some commissioned chantry chapels, others lit candles at anniversaries, and some wore discreet mourning tokens long after the court had moved on. But even in grief, their role did not pause. The kingdom looked to them for composure, for resilience. A queen could not crumble. Her womb was royal, and her sorrow, though immense, was often borne in silence. As the shadows deepen in this quiet birthing chamber, and the fire in the hearth gives off a gentle glow, we leave behind the pain and promise of royal motherhood. Ahead, we step into another layer of queenshipone, dressed not in linens or velvet, but in ink and parchment. A place where queens, though rarely recognized as such, wielded pens, sealed letters, and sent their words into the world. Now imagine the rustle of parchment in a quiet study, a quill dipped in ink, the faint scent of vellum and candle wax drifting through the air. It is here, away from the court's gaze and beyond the weight of ceremony, that some queens found their clearest voices. Though not all were formally educated, many medieval queens were literate, and those who were made full use of their skill. In a time when written words held legal, diplomatic, and symbolic weight, the ability to write and to commission writing was a subtle form of power. Through letters, queens could negotiate marriages, arrange alliances, or request support from nobles and foreign rulers. These were not idle correspondences, but carefully composed instruments of influence. They were expressions of diplomacy, patronage, and sometimes deeply personal sentiment. Consider Elizabeth of Hungary, a queen consort and later saint, who maintained a long correspondence with spiritual advisors. Her letters reveal a woman of contemplation and conviction, balancing her public role with a personal quest for piety and charity. Or Isabella of Castile, later in the period, whose commands and decrees survive in thousands of documents, signed in her own hand, Yola Reina, I, the Queen. Earlier queens had fewer opportunities to author public documents directly, but they still shaped messages, issued requests, and received reports from their lands and estates. Their chaplains or clerks may have penned the letters, but the thoughts, instructions, and intentions were often entirely their own. Some queens became literary patrons. They commissioned translations of devotional works, supported poets, and preserved ancient texts. Anne of Bohemia, wife of Richard II of England, is credited with bringing books in the vernacular to the English court, encouraging literacy and reading outside the Latin-educated elite. Through libraries and scriptoria, through dedications and illuminated initials, their presence lingers. Queens were not merely subjects of books. They shaped what was written, preserved what mattered, and curated the intellectual atmosphere of their courts. The content of their letters is often deeply human. Appeals for assistance during famine, requests for religious relics, instructions to trusted officials, expressions of sorrow, of faith, of motherly concern. There is something profoundly grounding in reading a queen's words as she frets over supplies for a convent or asks after the health of a beloved child. And in some cases, their words outlived their voices. Letters, preserved in monasteries or state archives, still carry the press of a ring seal, or a signature carefully formed often in French, Latin, or a local dialect. These documents, while modest in appearance, are testaments to a life of constant management and mediation, quiet power, whispered through ink. In their writings, queens could step beyond the performance of the court. They could speak plainly, though rarely without consequence. Every word held weight. Every phrase, especially in politics, was a delicate balance between assertiveness and acceptable decorum. And so, as we gently set aside the parchment and rest the quill in its inkstand, we prepare to turn our gaze outward, beyond the court, beyond the Queen's chamber to the wider world, to pilgrimage roads, foreign palaces, and the subtle art of queens abroad. Let us now imagine the rhythmic clatter of hooves on a long winding road, the faint jingle of harness bells, the steady crunch of wheels rolling over dirt and stone. Beneath a silken canopy rides the queenot in solitary grandeur, but amid a retinue of attendants, clerics, guards, and servants. Her presence, even beyond the walls of her palace, is a moving emblem of royal grace. Travel was not a rare occurrence for medieval queens, though it was seldom done with ease. Roads were poor, weather was unpredictable, and the logistics of moving an entire household were considerable. Yet queens travelled frequently for marriage, for diplomacy, for estate inspection, and for spiritual purpose. One of the most significant forms of travel was the progressor ceremonial journey through parts of the realm. During these journeys, queens visited noble households, religious houses, and loyal towns. They brought with them not just pageantry, but also governance. Petitions were received, land disputes were settled, gifts were exchanged, and through these visits the Queen's presence was made real to her subjects, her image more than a portrait or a coin. Queens also went on pilgrimages, spiritual journeys, to sacred shrines, taken with devotion and sometimes urgency. These were deeply personal undertakings, but also public acts of piety. A pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, Canterbury, or even Jerusalem was a statement of faith, humility, and connection to the divine. Consider Queen Matilda of Scotland, wife of Henry I, who was known for her religious devotion. She travelled frequently to monasteries and shrines, often barefoot as a sign of penance. These journeys, though arduous, were occasions for quiet reflection and visible virtue. At other times, travel was tied to politics. Queens often journeyed as emissaries to foreign courts, or more often, as brides delivered to distant lands. Such journeys marked both an ending and a beginning. A young queen, leaving her homeland behind, might never return. Her companions were few, her destination often uncertain. Eleanor of Provence, who became Queen of England in the 13th century, arrived from France as a teenager, speaking little of the local tongue, surrounded by unfamiliar customs. Her journey across the Channel was more than physical. It was a transformation from daughter to consort, from noble to queen. Foreign queens brought more than dowries. They introduced fashion, cuisine, art, and custom, a veil style, a musical mode, even the method of serving wine, small details that quietly reshaped courtly life. Queens were cultural conduits, even when they were not political actors. But travel also exposed vulnerability. On the road, queens were subject to ambush, illness, or rumour. The weather might turn, supplies might falter, and the presence of so many attendants brought its own challenges of hierarchy and discipline. To travel as a queen was to be both powerful and precarious, visible, revered, and sometimes resented. Every appearance was an act of diplomacy. Every pause along the way, an opportunity to win loyalty or to lose it. And so, as we hear the caravan slow, the horses breathing softly in the dusk, we return from the road and cross once more into the realm of ritual. Let us explore now the final veil of queenship, the sacred and symbolic ceremonies that defined her life in the eyes of her people. Imagine now the solemn hush of a cathedral at dawn. Tall vaulted ceilings stretch upward into shadow. The air is thick with incense, its scent curling like mist through shafts of pale light. A hush falls as the doors open, and the queen begins her slow, measured procession toward the altar. Her robes are heavy with embroidery. A jeweled circlet rests upon her brow. Every eye is upon her, yet she moves not as a woman, but as a symbol of continuity, of sanctity, of divine order. Ceremony was the fabric that wrapped the medieval queen in meaning. From her marriage to her coronation, from the baptism of her children to her funeral rites, the queen's public life was marked by ritual scripted and sacred, performed with the intention of reinforcing her place within both kingdom and cosmos. Let us begin with coronation. Though not all queens were crowned, for those who were, the ritual was deeply significant, often mirroring the king's anointing. The queen's coronation involved blessings, holy oils, and oaths. She might be invested with a crown, a ring, and a scepter, each symbolizing virtues such as wisdom, loyalty, and justice. These objects, though richly adorned, were not merely ornaments. They were physical manifestations of divine approval, granted before bishops, nobles, and the watching realm. The wedding ceremony, too, was a grand affair, often public, sometimes political. The queen's entrance into marriage was not only a private vow but a national alliance, often sealed with banquets, tournaments, and feasts. The fabrics of her gown, the design of the altar, even the spices in the foudiaque detail spoke to status and power. Behind the smiles and toasts, there was strategy, expectation, and future lineage carefully mapped out. And then there were the liturgical roles. The queen often participated in major feast days, Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, seated prominently at Mass, leading processions, and offering gifts to churches or cathedrals. These appearances reinforced her image as a pious intercessor between the divine and her people. During royal childbirths, prayers and masses were held for her safety and that of the unborn heir. When the child was born, the baptism ceremony became a public affirmation of dynastic continuity. Queens often served as godmothers to noble children as well, forging spiritual and political bonds through shared sacrament. Death, too, was wrapped in ritual. A queen's funeral was a final declaration of her place in the world. Her body, dressed in ceremonial garments, was displayed for vigil. Bells tolled, candles were lit, and mourners filed through chapels, heads bowed. The funeral procession might wind through towns and monasteries before reaching its final resting place. In some cases, the queen was buried beside her husband. In others, she was laid to rest in her own foundation, a convent or abbey she had patronized in life. Over time, effigies were carved to mark her tomb, often serene, hands folded in prayer, robes flowing like gentle water across the stone. These sculptures did not reflect her face so much as her role. She was remembered not for laughter or sorrow, but for virtue and dignity, a queen, eternal. And yet, beyond the stone and chant, these ceremonies offered something more intimate, moments when the queen was seen, not just as a woman of courtly intrigue or political calculation, but as a figure of reverence. In the stillness of the sanctuary, beneath painted domes and gilded altars, her image shimmered somewhere between earth and heaven. As we prepare to close our journey, let us now return to the present and reflect gently on the quiet resilience of queens long gone, whose footsteps still echo faintly in the vaulted silence of time. Now, as we return from the candlelit halls, the parchment-scented chambers, and the silent tombs of the past, allow your mind to settle like snow on the spires of a distant castle, soft, silent, and sure. The queens of the medieval world lived lives both gilded and constrained, adorned in fine cloth, yes, but hemmed in by expectation. Their faces looked out from coins, from tapestries, from manuscripts, but behind each depiction was a woman bearing the quiet weight of a crown. They were judged not only by what they ruled, but by what they bore, by the children they delivered, by the alliances they brokered, by the silences they held in the presence of power. A queen was rarely free, but she was always essential. And yet, within these boundaries, they found ways to shape the world around them, through letters and prayer books, through patronage and pilgrimage, through grace, even in grief. They built convents and chapels. They negotiated truces and treaties. They raised sons to kingship and daughters to queenship. And sometimes, in the shadows of their husbands, they ruled quietly, resolutely, wisely. Theirs was not the history of grand conquests or sweeping declarations. It was the history of subtle influence, of endurance, of elegance under pressure, a history not shouted, but whispered. And in those whispers lies their enduring power. So, as you rest now, perhaps with the faint image of a velvet-clad figure standing beneath a stained glass window, remember the stillness, the ceremony, the unseen strength that shaped their world and, in quiet ways, ours as well. You are far from the worries of today. You are safe and still. And as the past slips softly into dreams, may your night be peaceful as a queen's chamber, hushed by candlelight and cloaked in sleep. Good night.